lied to since you were a child. They told you that if you didn't work hard, if you didn't get up earlier than everyone else, if you didn't accumulate visible achievements, you would fail. They told you that the only way to be someone in life was to sacrifice yourself relentlessly, chasing a clock that never stops. And you believed it. You believed that the guilt of not always doing more was your natural punishment. That if you stopped for even a second, you were falling behind. But there's something in that story that never quite adds up. Because if it were true, if the value of a person really were measured by how much they exhaust themselves, then the most tired people would be the most admired. And they're not. On the contrary, the ones who seem to have it all are the ones who sweat the least in public view. Have you never wondered why? Take a calm look at the people around you. There are those who kill themselves in endless work days, always busy, always rushing, always needing to prove they're doing something. And then there are those others, the ones who seem to float outside the current, the ones who don't run, who don't need to justify every minute of their time. At first glance, they seem distracted, even lazy, but there's something in their presence that unsettles you. Something that makes you uncomfortable, even if you can't explain it. As if they had access to a truth that slips away from you. The system doesn't warn you about them. It prefers to point at the lazy as examples of what not to be. It prefers to scare you with the idea of mediocrity, to make you believe that resting equals surrender. Meanwhile, those who appear unproductive walk calmly, as if playing a different game, as if what truly matters is happening on another plane, one that almost no one dares to look at. And that's where the real mystery begins. Because maybe those people who don't follow the pace aren't wasting time at all. Maybe they're cultivating something that you, in all your rushing, will never see. Something that isn't measured in to-do lists, overtime hours, or sacrifices. Something born in silence. And when it emerges, it changes everything. The question you should be asking isn't whether you're working hard enough. The real question is far more unsettling. What if true strength isn't in the rush, but in what happens when it seems like you're doing nothing? What if what they fear most isn't your effort, but your silence? Think about this. We live in an era obsessed with noise, the noise of notifications, the noise of deadlines, the noise of constant productivity. Everyone seems to be shouting that they're busy, that they're working, that they don't have a second to spare. And yet, in the middle of that uproar, the ones who truly pull the strings are those who remain silent, the ones who don't need to prove anything, the ones who let the unconscious speak while everyone else drowns in a sea of meaningless tasks. What's unsettling is that this silence isn't empty. That silence is an incubator. Jung said the unconscious is like a dark ocean that never rests. While the conscious mind tires, the unconscious keeps weaving symbols, images, and solutions the rational mind could never reach. And here's the secret the system fears. Only those who dare to stop can hear that ocean. Only those who refuse to be dragged by external urgency can receive what arises from the depths. Modern society wants you to believe that creativity can be forced, that innovation comes from working harder than anyone else. But look at history. The discoveries that changed everything didn't come from endless visible effort. They were born in moments of disconnection, of dreams, of unexpected pauses. Newton wasn't locked in an office obsessing over results when the apple fell. Archimedes didn't solve his problem at a desk buried under papers. He did it in a bath, in a moment of apparent idleness. The unconscious doesn't care about schedules. It awakens when we let it breathe. And here lies another uncomfortable truth. The ambitious, lazy person doesn't need to prove productivity. because they understand that ideas aren't hammered out. They're received when the mind is free. That freedom is dangerous because it dismantles the strongest dogma of our culture: that your worth comes from what you produce, not from who you are. Imagine what would happen if more people understood this, if they discovered they could let go of the anxiety of always doing and still generate more impact than any worker of constant effort. The system would collapse. Because an exhausted worker is easy to control, but someone who no longer feels guilty for stopping is impossible to tame. That's why this kind of person is so disconcerting. While most measure their worth by the visibility of their sacrifice, they move like ghosts, invisible, showing nothing, until suddenly they show everything. And what they reveal isn't just another small achievement, but a revelation that transforms the way we think, create, or live. The mystery is that the ambitious, lazy person isn't a slave to urgency, but neither are they a conformist. Their apparent passivity is a disguise. Beneath that calm, something is brewing, something that escapes the logic of linear productivity. And when they decide to act, no one can anticipate it. That unpredictability makes them subversive, a threat to the order precisely because they cannot be captured by it. So ask yourself, what would happen if, instead of keeping on running, you started listening to your own silence? What would happen if, instead of surrendering to external noise, you trusted that your unconscious has more power than you imagine? Because there, in that hidden space you fear so much, lie the seeds of everything that could change your life. Do you want me to keep expanding from here into an even darker and more psychological layer, exploring how guilt over resting has become a mechanism of control as strong as any chain? Guilt, that word that seems harmless but has become the most effective weapon for keeping us chained. No guard is needed, no whip, not even an order. All it takes is for you to feel remorse every time you rest, to feel anxiety every time you don't produce. That inner voice whispering that you're wasting time, that you should be doing more, that others are advancing while you stand still. Where do you think it comes from? It isn't yours, it was implanted. The system perfected this mechanism because it understood something crucial. A person can free themselves from external chains, but if the chains are internal, no jailer is needed. Guilt becomes an invisible executioner that follows you everywhere. And here is where the ambitious, lazy person breaks the pattern. They don't feel guilt. Their rest is non-negotiable. Their pause doesn't need justification. While others punish themselves for not making the most of their time, they trust that time is working for them. And that's the threat. Because if more people stopped feeling guilty, the entire structure of control would crumble. The curious thing is that guilt is disguised as virtue. We're taught to take pride in being exhausted, to boast about not having time, to confuse tiredness with worth. Haven't you noticed? In any conversation, the one who says they're the busiest seems the most important. It's an absurd theater where exhaustion is paraded as a trophy. And yet, what does that exhaustion actually produce? People who think less, create less, and repeat more. People so tired they never question the game they're trapped in. Here's the disturbing part. The guiltier you feel for resting, the easier you are to manipulate. Guilt drives you to fill your days with empty activities, with projects that mean nothing, with routines that exist only to silence that inner discomfort. Meanwhile, the essential gets buried under tons of noise. The ambitious, lazy person, however, doesn't play that game. They prefer uncomfortable silence over useless busyness. They'd rather face their unconscious than distract themselves with superficial tasks. This goes deeper than it seems, because guilt doesn't just control your time, it controls your identity. If you don't produce, you're nothing. That's the hidden message you've been taught since childhood. But look closely. If your value depends on what you do, then you'll always need to do more to feel like someone. It's never enough. You never rest. You never arrive. You're the perfect slave. And yet, the one who understands that their value doesn't depend on productivity breaks that circle. They don't need to prove anything to themselves or to the world. They can rest without remorse. And in that freedom lies true power. What's fascinating is that Jung already intuited this. The shadow we fear isn't inactivity, but the void of not knowing who we are without constant work. That's why stopping feels so terrifying, because in silence emerges what we avoid facing. The ambitious, lazy person doesn't fear that confrontation. They sit with it, and in doing so, they find resources the rest never imagine. Imagine what would happen if you stopped feeling guilty for resting. Imagine what it would mean to live without that voice demanding you justify every minute. Do you see the danger that poses to a system built on obedience and blind sacrifice? You'd be impossible to domesticate because your rest would no longer be weakness, it would be strategy. And here arises the inevitable question. How much of your life have you given away to guilt? How many hours of rest have you turned into anxiety? How many times have you disguised your fear as productivity? Because every time you do, you hand over a piece of your freedom. And every piece you give turns you into the docile gear someone needs to keep the wheel spinning. What's most unsettling is that guilt never travels alone. It always comes with its most loyal shadow: comparison. Because it's not enough to feel like you're not doing enough. You also have to measure your life against others. This is how the system completes the circle. It gives you a distorted mirror where your value is reduced to metrics that never end. Salary, hours worked, projects completed, the invisible medals of a success that never arrives. And you, trapped in that game, run faster every day, but you don't move at all. Comparison is a drug. It connects you to the lives of others, but never to inspire, always to humiliate. And what does the ambitious, lazy person do in the meantime? They don't enter that race. They don't need to chase the same prize as everyone else because they're playing in another league, an invisible league, where what matters isn't measured in numbers or trophies, but in the reach of ideas that sprout from silence. That unsettles people, because here's someone who seems not to compete, yet somehow always ends up prevailing. Jung warned us that the collective exerts brutal pressure on the psyche. The masses want uniformity, want you to think, work, and behave like everyone else. And comparison is the perfect tool to keep you from daring to step out of line. Because if you do, guilt and envy will fall upon you like a storm. That's why those who don't play that game seem so strange. They don't respond to the invisible whip of competition. They don't need to prove anything. And that disinterest in competing is what makes them so dangerous, because they reveal that the entire race was an illusion. Notice how twisted the mechanism is. Most people believe they're free because they can choose how to compete, without realizing they've already accepted the underlying rule, that they must always compete. And while everyone devours each other in that senseless battle, those who seem lazy remain on the sidelines, incubating ideas that, when revealed, erase in an instant all the supposed importance of that race. Comparison also destroys the most valuable thing you have, your inner rhythm. The unconscious has no rush, no metrics, no clocks. It's like an underground river that flows at its own pace, and if you force it, it dries up. Comparison drags you out of that natural flow and forces you to follow an artificial beat that only breeds frustration. That's why so many feel empty even when full of achievements, because what they achieved didn't come from their inner rhythm, but from the pressure of a clock that never stops ticking. The ambitious, lazy person doesn't surrender that power. They don't sacrifice their rhythm for anyone else's. They may seem slow, even unproductive, but in truth, they're moving in sync with something much deeper. And that loyalty to their own time is what makes them unpredictable. No one can anticipate what they'll create because they don't follow the same calendar. They're like a storm. You can't control it. You can only wait for it to appear. Ask yourself, how many times have you lived someone else's life just out of fear of being left behind? How many decisions have you made not because you wanted them, but because you needed to prove you were at the same level as others? That's the real poison of comparison. It robs you of authenticity and turns you into a copy. And a copy never threatens the system. It only feeds it. But the one who refuses to compare, who dares to be invisible for a while, to prove nothing, to trust in what is gestating deep within, that's the one who breaks the illusion. That's the one who shows that the game was rigged from the start. And once you see it, you can never go back. The most disturbing part is that once you start seeing all this clearly, the world never looks the same again. You realize that guilt and comparison weren't fleeting emotions, but carefully designed bars to keep you docile. You discover that the supposed laziness you feared so much was always a mask hiding something else. Freedom. A freedom very few dare to touch, because it requires renouncing noise, applause, and constant validation. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. This is where most people get scared. Because if you accept this truth, you can no longer justify yourself with the old story of, I have to keep working hard to prove something. That excuse dies. What remains is much harsher. Either you listen to your inner rhythm, or you keep running until you bleed out in a marathon with no finish line. There's no middle ground. And that choice is uncomfortable, because if you decide to stop, you'll have to face everything the noise helped you avoid. Your fears, your shadow, your unconscious. Jung made it clear. What we don't make conscious returns as destiny. That's why the true power of the ambitious, lazy person isn't in what they create, but in what they reveal. They reveal that the race never existed, that productivity without awareness is just another form of slavery, and that silence can be more revolutionary than 1,000 hours of empty effort. That's what the system can't bear. That someone could exist without asking permission, without justifying themselves, without following the imposed choreography. Because the moment one dares to do it, others discover they can too. And now, if you've made it this far, I'll ask you for something. Don't let this video be just more noise in your day. Stay a moment in silence after hearing it. Feel it. Let it resonate in your unconscious. Because what really matters isn't what I tell you, but what you discover in that calm space. And if something inside you has lit up, if you feel that strange shiver telling you there's more than you thought, then write this phrase in the comments. Silence is dangerous. I want to see how many of those who made it to the end are willing to recognize it. If this mental journey stirred you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I say so, but because it means you want to keep exploring the truths the system will never tell you. We're not here to repeat the usual. We're here to crack open the invisible prison we've been forced to live in. And I'll leave you with something that may haunt you tonight. Every time you feel guilty for doing nothing, remember that maybe, in that very moment, your unconscious is silently working on something that will change your life forever. And the terrifying, fascinating, impossible to ignore part is that you won't know when it will explode. It could be tomorrow, it could be right now. Until next time, if after this, you still see the world the same way,